Welcome to today's legislation, and warm welcome to the Minister, who I think is really taking this brief by the scruff of the neck since he was appointed, and obviously we're all very grateful for that. And indeed, this is a moment really for sincere thanks to the Government and to the Committee on Climate Change for acting and allowing us to act in the way which we are set to do, because the IPCC report, which he referred to in his opening remarks, is really devastating. If we do not manage to limit the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees centigrade, we're going to find that sea levels keep on rising to an unsustainable degree. We're going to find that the impact on biodiversity is completely unsustainable. And the difference that the rise in temperatures between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees makes is clearly illustrated in that report. At 1.5 degrees centigrade, we will lose 6% of insects, 8% of plants, and 4% of vertebrates. That is devastating enough by any measure. At 2 degrees, the IPCC forecast we would lose 18% of insects, 16% of plants, and 8% of vertebrates. And of course, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade compared to 2 degrees centigrade has other consequences, obviously, most notably for us as a species. And the keeping it to 1.5 degrees centigrade may reduce the proportion of the world's population who are exposed to climate-induced water stress by 50%. The impact in an increasingly volatile and dangerous world can scarcely be overstated. So we need to do it. The science is clear, and we need to rebut the notion, which I think the Shadow Minister referred to, and I agree with him, that the costs we need to fight back against that the costs exceed the benefits, because doing the right thing for the environment is not at odds with doing the right thing for our economy. And of course, the UK's performance since the 1992 Rio Summit, where we have decarbonised the most of any G7 nation, at the same time as growing our economy the most of any G7 nation in that time, only goes to prove that. And of course, the committee's report was crystal clear that we can deliver net zero at no additional cost relative to the 2008 commitment to an 80% reduction in CO2 by 2050, owing to the pace of technological change. And that needs to be factored in to all our calculations when it comes to the achievability and the costs of this commitment. Anyone who's listened to Lord Adair Turner talking about this, as he's done so well, and the work of the Energy Transitions Committee, can be well reassured that we are indeed on track to deliver this in a cost-effective fashion. Of course, this goes to the point that coalition energy policy under the Cameron government was a huge success. The Contracts for Difference mechanism, which enabled the huge reductions in the cost, in particular, of offshore wind, goes to show that you can indeed achieve massive economic as well as technological change if you incentivise markets to deliver the outcomes that we all need to see. And anyone who looks at the proportion of the UK's energy generated by renewables, which stood at just over 6% in 2010, it's now 33%. You can deliver very far-reaching change in very short periods of time.
I will. I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a very important point about the good government can do and the change it can bring about. Does he agree with me that in order to reach this ambitious target, we're going to need every single level of government, from local government, devolved administrations and central government, to work together to make sure we can deliver this ambitious target for 2050?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. This is something which no one can regard as somebody else's challenge, and that goes for the private sector as well as the public sector. Everyone is going to have to realign their expectations in light of this commitment, because it is genuinely groundbreaking. I think that it's easy perhaps to underestimate the significance of what we're gathered here today to legislate for. This is a world-leading initiative by a developed nation. It is a profound statement of our commitment to a cleaner and greener world. I will give way. I promise I will not take more time than my allotted allowance.
Campaigned so vigorously on this issue. He's right to say that this is world-leading legislation and the UK is taking that lead. But does he agree with me that China, which emits something like 25 times the amount of carbon emissions as the UK, is really going to need to play its part?
Yeah.
Now, of course, that isn't a counsel for despair, and I think that we are, in many ways, of course, setting a powerful example which other countries will be inspired to follow. I also think, of course, that by legislating for net zero, you start to create some of the economic opportunities which other countries will, in their turn, be keen to seize. So I do believe that we can set a powerful moral and economic example for other countries to follow. And I should add, by the way, that I'm very grateful for his very kind words, and actually echo the fact he too has fought very long and hard to make this happen. So thank you for that. On that economic opportunity point, I want to briefly bang the drum for carbon capture and storage. The CCC is absolutely clear in its report that we need to deliver CCS. And actually, and contrary to what the Honourable Gentleman said from a sedentary position, the government is now taking CCS as an integral part of its green industrial strategy. And we need to make sure that we get a number of clusters rolled out as quickly as possible, and of course one of those should be Teesside, and I should praise the work of the Tees Collective, which is a pioneering group of industrial companies, all of whom want to see this happen, not least because there are certain industries like steel, cement, plastics and fertilisers which emit CO2 as an inextricable part of their production techniques, and so even if you fully decarbonised our energy mix, those sectors would still need CCS in order to make sure that they weren't contributing to our carbon emissions. My final point is, of course, that this is a wonderful example of how the UK can show a moral lead in the world after Brexit, and I really praise the way that we are fighting to deliver the COP26 alongside Italy as part of our efforts. I hope that if we do indeed secure that we will make the drive for net zero an integral part of our prospectus for that conference.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy.